Hi friends, I'm Kyla and welcome back to the Infinite Library. It is that time of year where we're getting to essentially the end of my reading for this year. At the time of filming was on the 28th of December. I'm not likely to have any other books that are really going to shift my overall ratings too much. There is maybe one that I'm reading that might, we'll see, I'll mention it later in this video. So let's have a look at what are some of the best books that I have read during this year. So I have my top 10, of course, but there are just so many really good books that I read this year that I also have a bunch of honourable mentions that I want to talk about. Looking at these books that I'm going to talk to you about today, it's interesting because so many of these are in my obviously preferred genre of fantasy, but there's a lot of variety here in terms of fantasy. There's a lot of cozy fantasy, which I've really gotten into this year. I think there is not as much horror as I was kind of hoping to be in this. I think I only have one horror book in my top 10, which is quite surprising. Like, I've read some good horror, but I just don't think I've read anything amazing, which I hope is something that I will actually be able to do in 2025, and then maybe you'll actually see something that is not just fantasy in my top 10. So, without further ado, let us go through the books, starting with my honourable mentions. So, the only book that I don't have a physical copy of is The Tea Dragon Society. This is a very cute, cozy graphic novel. It's part of a series, and I'm dying to pick up the next ones. It's quite short, but I just love everything about this. This is the definition of like a cute, cozy cup of tea. It is kind of what it says on the tin. There are these little creatures called tea dragons, and people sort of like look after them to be able to like harvest the tea from them, I guess, but it's more like they give it willingly and they only kind of grow when they're happy. It's also kind of like a queer romance in there as well between these two girls that are looking after the dragons, and it was just super cute and super wholesome, and I'm glad I finally got around to checking this out. So yeah, that is a very cute one to start off this video with. On to less cute. Idle Burning by Rinasami. This was an unexpected favourite of mine, and one I feel like is not a favourite for a lot of people, to be honest. It's a very short little novella that is actually just literary fiction. It is basically about this high school girl called Akari, and she is like absolutely obsessed with this K-pop star, and he ends up being flamed online for something he did. She just kind of goes slightly insane over it all, and her obsession is just growing and growing as she's struggling to deal with what is happening to this person who she admires so much. It's not a happy book, and I don't even know why I love this book so much. I just thought the writing was absolutely beautiful, and I just really enjoyed my time with it. I did this by audiobook, which I do recommend. I feel like this is a book that not many people would like, but for me, it just really worked. It was that perfect amalgamation of weird introspection, weird things going on, and I just really liked it. So yeah, that was a favourite of mine. On to an actual horror of sorts. It's more of a horror comedy, and this was an unexpected surprise for me this year, and that is Apocalypse Cow by O.R. Sorrell. I had such a good time with this book. I kind of saw the cover and honestly had very low expectations going into it, but I knew from the premise that this was a horror comedy, but it was also a queer horror. So basically it is about this girl called Mel, and she is in love with her best friend, who is kind of oblivious and also dating this guy who is an actual douchebag, and she gets bullied by like all the popular girls at school, including one of them who unfortunately used to be her best friend, so that's not fun. And then the world goes crazy. Animals start mutating, they start getting all these like crazy little superpowers and start killing everybody. So we have a bit of apocalypse going on. It very quickly goes into Walking Dead 28 Days Later territory with that. It does not hold back in terms of how grotesque and how it depicts the apocalypse. Our girl Mel is basically just stuck in this mansion with the two people she hates the most in the world, her best friend's horrible boyfriend, and one of the bullies from school. And it is about the three of them sort of learning to navigate this apocalypse, learning about each other, and I just really had a good time with this book. This is a book that I would just yell about a lot. It was goofy, it was fun, it had a lot of heart, and I can't wait to see more from this author, to be honest. Next we have a very recent read of mine, if you've been watching videos on my channel, is Wayward by Amelia Hart. This won last year's Goodreads historical and debut category, and it is historical fantasy, basically following these three women on different time periods. One in like the 1600s who is being put on trial as a witch, one who is in the like 1940s or something, who is a kind of noble girl who is growing into herself but is being forced into society's obligations and struggling against that. And then a woman in modern day who is escaping an abusive relationship and kind of runs away to this cottage and starts finding out about her family. And I really love this book. I can see why this won the categories. I love the female rage in this book. This is such a good for her kind of book. I really enjoyed it. Yeah, it was really good. Next, we actually have two books, and this was the first buddy read that I did at the beginning of the year. Unfortunately, I feel like all my other buddy reads this year have not gone well, but this very first one did, thankfully. And that is The Strange the Dreamer duology by Laini Taylor, consisting of Strange the Dreamer and Muse of Nightmares. This is a fantasy series by the same author of Daughter of Smoke and Bone, and I've been meaning to check this out for a while, but I don't think I had like low expectations, but because I wasn't too crazy on that series, I actually DNF'd it. I wasn't sure if I was going to love this series, but I really, really liked it. I thought the world building was so good. This is about a boy called Laszlo. He is a librarian, but he's obsessed with these stories about this lost city. And then he ends up going to this city with a group of people, and it is about also these children that live in the sky in this lost city and how they're trying to escape that place. And I really, really had a good time with this. I wasn't too crazy on the romance of it, but I just had a really good time with this. I had a really good time with a buddy read, and this is such a good, like, solid fantasy series that you're not going to have to read a million books to finish. This is a complete duology. Really, really good. Please check it out if you've been on the fence about it. Next, I have a manga series. I've only got the first book here, but I currently am 4 volumes into the series, and it is Witch Cat Atelier by Kamomi Shirahama. I just love this series so much. This is such like a nostalgic kind of fantasy manga for me. It's about this girl called Coco. She accidentally uses some magic and ends up being taken to this atelier to be taught how to use magic, essentially, to try and fix a mistake that she made. And it's her and a bunch of other girls who are at this atelier all kind of growing and learning and sort of taking these tests to become great witches. And this is such a cute series. It's full of heart. It's definitely made me emotional quite a lot. I highly recommend it. It is getting an anime in 2025, I believe, but the artwork for this series is just like absolutely stunning. It's like, yeah, it is so gorgeous. It's such a good series, and I can't wait to read more of it. A manga I've just been absolutely loving my time with. Then we have a book that I feel like if I hadn't have read some other really good things, this would have been in my top 10, but it just kind of misses out on that. And that's A Study in Drowning by Ava Reed. I also read this, I think, for my Goodreads series. I think this was in my YA fantasy. This is very light on the fantasy, I will say, though, but I love Ava Reed's writing. This is like my second book of hers, I think. I've read Juniper and Thorn, which is also one that I don't think is very popular, but I really loved it. And I feel like that's the same with this book as well. Like, I've definitely seen this book on a lot of people's like worst books kind of thing, but I just really love her writing style. I love how dreamlike this whole book is. I just had such a good time with it. I'm really excited about getting a sequel to it, which is called A Fairy in Drowning, which should be coming out in 2025. But yeah, I just love everything I've read by Ava Reed. I still need to get to Lady Macbeth, and I think it's The Wolf and the Woodsman, but I love her dreamy, dark fairy tale kind of way that she tells stories. Yeah, I love this book. This is about a woman called Effie, I think her name is, and she ends up entering this architecture competition to go and basically rebuild, I suppose, a house that belonged to her favourite author who wrote these like strange fairy tales. And when she's there, she ends up like kind of finding out there are still really weird things going on with this place. The owner of the place is kind of weird and haunting. She ends up like kind of working with this academic rival of hers who is trying to disprove the author, which she's not happy about, but the two of them end up working together to try and figure out what weird things are going on. It's very gothic, it's very haunting, it's very slow paced, but I just really had a good time with it. It's such a mood read, honestly. Then we have what was a really unexpected favourite of mine, and that is Sisters by Daisy Johnson. This is a literary fiction with a nice little splash of horror in there. It's very psychological, and I really want to read more by Daisy Johnson. She writes folk horror kind of stuff, I believe, so I've got her latest book, The Hotel, but I haven't got to it yet. But this one just worked for me in so many ways. I also did this via audiobook, which I really recommend, by the way. And this is, as you might imagine, a tale of two sisters, and also their mother, by the way, as well. They are not twins, but they very much kind of act twins. They're very codependent. They are weirdly connected in almost a telepathic kind of way. And I don't really want to say more about it because it really does spoil the impact of what happens in the story. But I just thought this was so haunting. I love the way that Daisy writes this, and I just had a really, really good time with this book. It's very short as well, so if you want something to check out that's very gothic, that's very weird, kind of coming of age, but not really, like these girls are teens, and there are certain elements of it that read teen, but then definitely also read very adult. Really, really loved this one. On to my last two now of the honourable mentions. This one is a very recent read, and I feel like this is my hear me out book of the year. It's Blood of Hercules by Jasmine Mass. Is this the best book ever? No. Did I have an absolute whale of a time and was completely obsessed whilst I was reading it? Yes. I did kind of rate this a 5-star, but it's probably more of a 4-star. Realistically, this is a romantasy set in a kind of a modern day alternate society kind of place. It's really hard to describe, to be honest. Essentially, Sparta is kind of seen as these like immortal warrior people who are better than humans. They're split into Olympians and Symphonics, and they all have powers, and our main girl, Alexis, finds out that she is one of them and has to go and do these trials to sort of claim her birthright. And she's very mad about it. She's not happy about it, and she's even less happy about the fact that all these guys start getting kind of obsessed with her. But I just loved her so much. She was so sassy, and I had a really good time with this. I don't know what else to say. I was just kind of eating this up and obsessed, and I feel like it belonged in this video because I started trying to read it slower as I got through because I didn't want it to end. I'm so desperate for the next book to come out. I will preface saying all the men in this book are completely awful. This is not a romance book, but I was just fully here for it. And I just loved our main girl, Alexis, like so much. Like, that girl is my wife. I love her. She's so done with everything, and I relate to that so much. So yeah, this is one of my honourable mentions. I'll probably do a more coherent, maybe review of this in my December wrap-up. But suffice to say, this kind of came out of nowhere. I picked it up kind of on a whim. I also had to do it by audiobook, which the audiobook is pretty good as well. And I just really liked it. So yeah, I don't know what else to say. Is it kind of bad? Yeah. Is it trashy? Yes. I ate it up. I loved it. I had such a good time with this book. I have not laughed or had so much fun with a book in ages. So yeah, that is my rave review, I suppose, of Blood of Hercules. And the final book in the honourable mentions is The Cautious Traveller's Guide to the Wastelands by Sarah Brook. This is a debut book, I believe, and this was one that I was not on my radar at all, but I was going to a Fantasy Authors in the North panel, and an author I know, Frances White, was going to be there, and there was a bunch of other authors, so I wanted to check out some other books by the other authors before going, so I wasn't just like clueless about who else was going to be there. And this one just sounded right up my alley straight away. This kind of comes across as a mystery, but it's not really a mystery, but this is like a historical fantasy set on a train which is going across these wastelands en route from, I believe it's China to Russia. And essentially this is like the quickest way to get from one place to the other. But to do so, the train has to go through this very dangerous area, which people are terrified of. There is this thing called wasteland sickness that people worry will take over you if you like stare out at it for too long, and there's this whole mystery about what is actually out there. And we followed these 3 different characters on the train that all get interlinked to one another. I had just such a good time with this, and I thought this just told such an interesting, complex and very complete story throughout it all, which is very much about accepting the unknown, about exploration. Essentially, the three characters in this, one is a noblewoman whose father was disgraced after an incident that happened on a previous train journey. He was an engineer, something went wrong, he was blamed for it. She wants to find out what exactly happened. Another is a disgraced naturalist who wants to know what's out in the wasteland, basically, which invariably gets him into trouble. And the third character is a really interesting one. She is a girl that has grown up on the train. She was basically birthed on there, found as a baby, and they kind of just let her stay there because they just did. There's no real good reason for it, but she ends up living on the train. She is known as a child of the train, and she is harboring somebody who shouldn't be there on the train. And yeah, this was so interesting. I really love this. This definitely gave me vibes of books like Floating Hotel, A Voyage of the Damned, and it did some really interesting things I just enjoyed so much. Okay, here we are now into the top 10 books of 2024 for me. I would say a lot of these are 2024 releases, which is kind of a surprise. There is maybe one or two backlist books on there, but a lot of these are new releases. So pretty solid in terms of what books came out in the year. First book is one that I will rave about until the sun comes home. I feel like it's one of those books that has passed by everybody and I loved it so much. And it's actually a sci-fi. This is 13 Ways to Kill Lulabelle Rock by Maud Wolfe. This was such an interesting book. Also, the cover is so amazing. This is basically about this film star who, this is a world where people make clones of themselves to basically just go around and do whatever they need doing. And this film star has 12 different versions of herself to just go out and basically do social stuff, to do appearances, to do advertising, that kind of thing, where while she just kind of chills in her mansion. Then she makes a 13th one, which she creates to be an assassin to kill all the other Lulabelles. And it's about this assassin who goes out, meets some people, meets all the different clones, and learns how they're different, how she herself is different, and she starts to be able to create a life for herself. And I really, really loved this book. It's such a weird concept. It's such an interesting, like, commentary on social media, on popularity, on how shallow certain people can be, like the fact that she's created all these clones and then she's like, just kill them all, and has to create another one to do the task. It's such a ridiculous concept, but I really, really loved this. Also had a really good queer love story, which came out of nowhere, and I just really loved this so much. I kind of want them to make a movie out of this with the girl from Orphan Black who is so good at doing different versions of herself as this, because it would be so good. I can't remember if this is a debut book or not, but I definitely want to read more by this author, or at least similar things in this vein. Like, I've been reading a lot of sci-fi this year, and I found a lot that hasn't been working for me, to be honest, but this really worked for me. It also has like a little thing at the back which basically tells you like what the themes are of the book, so I'll read that to you as a final thing. And it says, file under Blade Runner Barbie, Time to Kill, All of Me, tarot reading. Love it. Okay, next we actually have a YA book. I think this is not the only YA book on the list, but I think it's the only one that really screams that it's YA. And it's also one of the few just fiction on my list. And that is We Deserve Monuments by Jazz Hammonds, who, by the way, I realised only just now when I was checking to see if she had written other books, has another book out that came out this year that was also on my radar called Thirsty. So I was like really interested in that book. It kind of like is a YA book about these swimmers who deal with alcoholism and various other stuff. It sounded really complicated and a little bit depressing, and I was a bit unsure about it, but now that I know it's by this author, I'm definitely checking that out. This book, however, though, We Deserve Monuments, I read this for the Goodreads challenge because it was in the YA fiction category, and it was a book I almost wasn't going to pick, and something about this cover, this book, was just calling to me. I just got quietly obsessed with it before I even read it. So I just gave up. I got a copy and I absolutely love this book. This was everything I wanted it to be. This tells the story of a young girl called Avery. She is basically moved from like the big city to this kind of place out in the sticks, and she is also kind of struggling with her identity at the time because she is keeping her sexuality a secret from her friends back home. So she gets moved to this new place, and not only does she find out things about her family because they've gone to stay with like her grandmother, who she doesn't really know that well. I think her family been separated from them. And she goes there, she goes to a new school, she starts making friends in this small town, she starts kind of getting like a little bit of romance brewing, but she also finds out a lot about her family history that she wasn't expecting. And she starts to sort of connect with her like racial identity in ways that she was never able to do back home. And I thought this was just a beautiful depiction of a girl learning about her past and a girl learning to be herself, to grow into herself. And I thought her story was so beautiful. I just really, really loved it. But yeah, it's a small southern town, so as expected, there is kind of like something darker under the surface to do with like racial hatred that happened in the past, and she's like uncovering stuff about that and learning how race is important in her life, when I think it's just something she always ignored before. But yeah, love this so much. Even though it's YA, honestly, I would recommend this even if you don't typically read YA, because while this definitely is YA, but I just thought this had so many good things to say. It was so important and I loved it so much. Definitely a book that I wish I had read when I was a teen, because it's just so freaking good. Okay, next we have the start of the cozy fantasies, and not really a surprise because I think I read the premise for this and was like, this sounds perfect. I hope it's going to be exactly what I want it to be from that premise, and it was. But it's just really stuck with me and I just love this so much. And that is Till Death Do Us Part by Rose Black. And this author recently has another book that's just come out, which I do own, but I haven't got to it yet, which I think is going to be in the similar kind of vein, which I'm very excited to get to. But this book is a cozy fantasy, of course, and it is telling the story of Logan, also known as the Bear, and he is happily married to this bard called Pie, short for Magpie, and then his husband goes missing, and he ends up seeking the services of these two people that he would never normally talk with. Like, he ends up talking to this old lady who's a necromancer and summoning the spirit of his dead ex-wife to help track down his husband. And it's just this really fun shenanigans of these misfits as they're going and finding his husband, as they're interacting with each other, as they're starting to learn about each other. And I just really, really loved this. I thought it had so many things to say about love, about friendship. It was also really funny, of course. And I really like that the romance in this was between an established couple that are older, like they are in their like early 40s, I want to say, and it's so nice to see that in a fantasy, that it's like an older couple and not someone who's in their 20s. But yeah, this was really, really funny. This really gave me like the kind of vibes of Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher, that kind of idea of this like crazy kooky cast of misfits that are all kind of stuck together, and I just loved all the character dynamics so much. The necromancer old woman was like perfection. I loved her so much. This was a really fun read. Really, really enjoyed it. Can't wait to read more from Rose Black. Then at number 7, we have what is probably one of the only horror in this list, and I say horror kind of lightly. It was in the Evernight description, but it's also kind of a fantasy, and that is The Invocations by Crystal Sutherland. I went into this really just hoping for dark, twisted witchiness, a bit like The Craft. exactly what I got. This was everything I wanted it to be. It was really high on body horror, which I will warn people before going in. There is a lot of stuff to do with like rotting bodies in this, but I really, really loved this. This is a supernatural mystery set in modern day, telling the story of these 3 women here. So we have Emma, who is our curse writer, and she basically specializes in carving magic into people's bodies to give them like spells, give them abilities, mostly for women who should protect them. Then we have Jude, who is a rich girl who has messed up royally when trying to do some curse writing herself. Essentially with curse writing, you're kind of like bonding yourself to a demon in exchange for power, and she messed up royally and she's trying to find a way to fix it. And then finally we have Zara, who is our youngest, most naive person of the 3, who is kind of very new to magic, but her sister was murdered like a year or so ago, and she knows it's got something to do with magic, and she is trying to find a way to bring her sister back. This was a mystery because there is a series of killings that are happening, and the 3 of them end up getting embroiled in it to try and find out exactly what's happening with their own kind of goals and motives in mind. And yeah, I really, really loved this. I thought the plot was really well done. I enjoyed all 3 of the characters in different ways, which I feel like doesn't happen very often. It's also beautifully queer. I just really, really had a good time with this. I think I listened to a lot of this by the audiobook as well, which is also quite good, but I could have happily just read this physically too. This is adult the craft, basically. Like for me, this is classed as a YA, but it really does feel more adult to me. This is very borderline YA because it is so adult in terms of what it does. I really, really loved this, had such a good time with it. This was the perfect witch book for me. Speaking of perfect witch books, at number 6, we have The Honey Witch by Sydney J. Shields. This is another one that I feel like missed the mark for a lot of people, but I just really, really love this. I actually read this quite early because I received an ARC for it. I love this book so much. This is a historical, very cozy kind of fantasy, although there are definitely less cozy aspects to it. This is also a book about grief, but we follow our main girl Marigold, who finds out that she has like a magical lineage when her grandmother comes to visit her and invites her to basically come back to her to this little island to learn to become a honey witch, which is a witch that kind of deals with the magic of honeys and bees. There's a lot to do with like the flowers that you feed them, that kind of thing. But basically like they kind of serve as a protector for the island. This is also a queer romance, which I really enjoy, but I will also say it's a slow burn. Like do not go into this book expecting it to be a romance, because we don't even have the romance start for like halfway through the book. But I was having such a good time with this. I honestly didn't care. I loved the first half of this book so much, which is just all to do with Marigold and her grandmother and her learning how to be a witch and her like growing into herself, because it was kind of like a very Bridgerton debutante kind of society where she came from, and she just didn't really fit into it. However, the whole thing of her being a honey witch is that to be the honey witch, you are not allowed to fall in love, or you cannot fall in love, as part of like a curse, I suppose, on the family line. So of course, what happens is that she does meet somebody that she kind of ends up falling for, and it is about them sort of trying to figure this out essentially after that. And this was just such a cozy time. I fell completely in love with the characters in this book. Like Marigold, I just wanted to hug her. I loved her so much. She was literally like her name, like just a little ball of sunshine. And I loved the grumpy sunshine romantic relationship in this well, and how it's one of those worlds where everyone is just casually bisexual, and I kind of love that. I love those queer normative worlds because, you know, it's fantasy and why not? So yeah, this was such a lovely book for me, a very emotional favourite for me. Like I can see how this would not work for people, but for me this just hit every mark. This really got me emotionally. I love this book so much. Next, at the number 5 spot, we have Voyage of the Damned by Frances White. You've probably heard me talk about this book so much on my channel. I will never miss a chance to rave about this book. This book is just so fun. This came out towards the beginning of the year, and it is described as being like a gay murder mystery cruise. This is set in a fantastical world where people are kind of split into different regions, very Hunger Games, in terms of like how each region specializes in a certain thing, and each leader of each region has like these special powers that comes to them to help them kind of protect and help rule their region. And we are actually in like the fish region, essentially, with Ganymedes. And he is different because he does not actually have a power, which he is trying to keep a secret. And he is forced to go onto this like cruise with like a bunch of all the other young heirs of the different regions to go on this mystical pilgrimage mission together. And he's not happy about it. However, they all go and they're on this very isolated kind of ship together, and then someone is murdered. And it becomes a case of Ganymedes kind of teaming up with this young girl and with this other person to figure out exactly who is behind it. This is essentially kind of a locked room mystery, and as time goes on, the stakes get higher. And I just really love the characters in this book. This really gave me the kind of vibes of those crazy kind of murder mystery stories, things like Knives Out, obviously very inspired by certain video games like Danganronpa, like the Zero Escape series. This kooky cast of characters. I loved finding out so much about all the different characters. I loved our main kind of group who were kind of detecting and finding out kind of thing. I loved like the end reveal of who was actually behind this all, and this is only not higher in this list because I didn't quite love a certain twist that happened towards the end. But overall, this was a really solid book, a very solid debut for Frances White as well, and I'm really excited to see what she's going to be writing next. She might have another book coming out 2025, I'm not sure, but really loved this book. It was so fun. Again, cozy for a murder mystery. It's not really, but I've really been loving books this year that have been giving me like really fun kind of characters, and Ganymedes is that. Great cast. I will love a book if it's got a really good cast, and this does. A book that, again, I feel like is one that people have not been giving a chance, and I really wish they would, because I think this has so much good things in it. Okay, on to number 4, and this is actually another book that came out very much towards the start of the year, like Voyage of the Damned. It actually kind of came out towards the end of last year, but I don't think I got to it until January, so we're gonna count it. And that is Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. I loved Divine Rivals so much last year, and this is the sequel and end of the series, and I think some people were disappointed by it, but I just thought this was the perfect end to a series. This is a 5-star duology for me. So this is a historical, light on the fantasy to be honest, but it's a historical fantasy about these two journalists who kind of start out as like rivals at a journalism firm, and then they go out to report on this fantastical war that's happening between these two gods. And the ending of the first book is pretty crazy, and this, after a little bit of a time jump, I think, I was really worried about where this was going to go, like where it left it off at the end of the first book. It felt a little bit like the author was just trying to find ways to stop these two being together, and I was really worried about what it was going to do, but I actually really liked the execution of this. Seeing these two, who I love them so much together, seeing these two manage to get back together again. And for those people that did sort of say about how the first book was like not fantastical enough, I think this definitely does actually give that more, which is a plus. I think this one definitely does delve more into the fantastical aspects of the war. You find out a lot more about it, and for me this was just a perfect little duology. I just rooted for these two so hard. I was just totally in love with this books. I'm definitely gonna check out more by Rebecca Ross in the future. Loved this book so much. Okay, we're on to the top 3 now. So these are like the best of the best books. These are the books that I probably struggled to put into order, but I think for me it was only between the first and the second, between what was going to get the first place. These were like the best of the best books. I loved all 3 of these books so much. So at number 3 spot we have Throne of the Fallen by Kerri Maniscalco. I know this is a weirdly romance heavy set of favourites for me, which is very unexpected. This was not the year I got into romance, but I guess the year that I started to like some of them a little bit more. This is a romantasy that I read for the romantasy series, and I just really love this book so much. Again, just like Blood of Hercules, for me this is a case of where I loved the heroine so much. She is my wife, who's kind of working doing forgeries. It's a kind of like a magical world. It's kind of set in a historical but magical world. This is following a painter called Camilla, who is embroiled in doing these like fake magical forgeries for people in high society and trying not to let it be found out. And she ends up getting caught up in this game essentially along with a prince of hell called Envy. The two of them together were just super fun. I loved their banter, and I just really loved the whole storyline for this one. Again, this was a book that I just had so much fun with, did not want it to end. I was just eating it up, and this really weirdly gave me vibes of the Dark Hunter series by Cheryl and Kenyon, that kind of dynamic of these two being together, about them kind of playing this game with one another. I just really enjoyed it, and I loved the twist towards the end as well, once we kind of delve a little bit more into the Feylands. This is the book about the two of them going on a journey, and I realised that I really love those kind of books. Two people who have to go on some kind of journey into weird realms together. I'm really vibing with that kind of thing. There is a sequel out for this now called Throne of the Fallen, which I haven't been able to get to yet, but I am really desperate to get to it because I was just obsessed with this book, and I'm still kind of obsessed with it. I did not expect to see a romantasy in my top 10, but here we are. I just love this so much. My number 2 spot then, I actually have a whole series here for that, because it's not really one book. It is a whole series, and it is a manga series that I was just completely obsessed with this year. And that is The Summer Hikaru Died by Moku Moku Ren. This is a vaguely queer slice of life horror series. It's kind of hard to describe, but I just absolutely love this series so much. I think the artwork is beautiful. I think the story is so well done. This really gives me like Higurashi vibes. There's some truly screwed up artwork in this. We're also kind of going into a little bit of a mystery now as the story is going on. I say there is only 4 books currently released in the UK. I think we're getting a few more soon, and I'm desperate to carry this on. I'm just obsessed with the series. Actually, this is about a boy called Hikaru, and also about his best friend called Yoshiki. Hikaru kind of goes away up in the mountains. The summer just gone. He goes up into the mountains, and when he comes back, he is not the same. And Yoshiki figures this out like straight away, that Hikaru is actually dead, and some kind of entity has taken over his body. And this entity is kind of obsessed with Yoshiki and is still trying to live as if he is Hikaru. Like, he has all his memories as well. That is how he's able to kind of convince people. But then I'm just like so intrigued by this whole relationship between the two of them. I'm so intrigued about what Hikaru is now. And we're starting to delve into like mysteries around the village about how maybe this was not as unusual occurrence as it could have been, how there is like history of entities, how there is dark stuff going on in the village, and I'm just loving it. Like, not every volume is as strong as the first one, I don't think, and that is probably one of the only reasons why this is not in the first place, but I just love my time with this. Like, I get through these so fast. Really love this series so much. A very dark, twisted horror, and it's getting an anime next year, which I'm hoping will be good. I am unsure how it's going to go, but I really hope they're going to do a good job of it. So, at my number 1 place, and my favourite book of the whole of 2024, I feel like this is kind of a predictable choice, to be honest. I feel like it's a lot of people's favourites whenever they read it, but I just cannot deny how utterly brilliant this book is. And it's Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. This was so good. I just, again, a book that I had such a good time reading. I think this won the fiction category last year in Goodreads. It's won so many awards, and I can honestly see why. To anyone that doesn't know about what this book is, this is a literary fiction, kind of a thriller in some ways, but also a big social commentary. So we're following a white writer called June, who is a writer, but not like a really popular writer. And she's kind of jealous of like one of her friends called Athena, who is an Asian writer who was incredibly popular, getting loads of buzz, like just got like a really big book deal. And she goes over to Athena's house and finds out about this manuscript that Athena's writing, that she reads some of it, and she's like, oh my god, this is like going to be the best thing ever. And then Athena dies right there in front of her, and June steals the manuscript, finishes it, and then publishes it as her own. It is just an absolute train wreck from there on. Everything about her essentially like taking on this identity of someone that is not herself. She takes on an ambiguous racial identity to make the book more popular, which we've definitely seen before. It's such a good like satire and critique of the publishing industry, but also in like how people use social media. June is like absolutely obsessed with her popularity, with being on Twitter, with seeing herself blow up, and she's just obsessed with this idea of being famous. And she goes to so many lengths to ensure that she gets famous. She fucks up so much royally, and it's a great time seeing it happen. I'm not gonna lie. I need to read more by R.F. Kuang. Obviously, I still have Babel to read, but yeah, I can see why this has had the acclaim. It's such a clever, well thought out story. It's a heroine that you don't want to root for, but my god, you want to see her crash and burn. This is, yeah, easily my favourite book of the year. Like, all of these 10 books I've read, I've loved so much. They've all been really good, but nothing quite really hits the mark like Yellowface did. So, that is my 10 books. So, that is my top 10 books of 2024. Quite a hefty stack, as you can see. A lot of these were really quite long. But yeah, these were the best of the best books that I read. Oh my god. Bluebell is trying to assassinate me at the moment. Get back up there, girl. But yeah, I loved all these books so much. I don't know what this stack tells you about my taste. I'm just looking at it now and I'm like, yeah, romantic fantasy, but also really cozy, queer, funny fantasy, banter in my fantasy, weird literary, contemporary and sci-fi books, witch books, and a really good YA. That is it. I need to put this down because it's very heavy. Thank god they did not fall everywhere. But yeah, that's my best books of the year. I had such a good time. I read so many good books this year. Again, this is just a portion of them. I am going to be doing in the new year a whole tier ranking where you will see where I put every single book that I read during this year. And of course, if you haven't already seen it, my worst books of the year video is also up. You can go find it here, where you can see what I did not have a good time with this year, but thankfully I also had a very good time this year. So that is it from me. I'd love to hear your thoughts down below, like if there's some of these books that you agree with. I'd love to hear what your top books of the year were, honestly. Maybe it's something that I could like do as a video project, that I kind of like read some of your favourite books that you read in the past year. It doesn't have to be new releases. I'm all about backlist books as well. I hope you enjoyed this. I had a lot of fun filming it, and until the next video, stay safe, stay cozy, and I'll see you again soon. Bye!